the whole COVID matter, those who questioned it, in many cases, have turned out to be correct, turning us in the right direction regarding this, particularly shutting off children from the normal activities of childhood. And those who questioned it, who said, wait, there could be unanticipated consequences here, were not following the climate of opinion. They were following the quote-unquote, they were resisting the quote-unquote science. Any scientist will tell you science is a process of questioning, of looking at, of reassessing, of recognizing that oftentimes what is considered established science falls apart. So true. And to simply say the science is established is most times not true. Science is always evolving. Lewis observed that 80 years ago. Climates of opinion. In other words, you can't go against what seems to be the most common or the most popular or the forced upon narrative. But in many respects, as Lewis said, discoveries are made and errors corrected by those who venture outside of the standard climates of opinion. And those climates of opinion are much stronger now because we have media that simply goes into every crevice of our existence. CS, once again, ahead of his time. Got to run. Thank you for joining me here on The Doctor's In. Thanks to Andrew Kruchek for all your editing and producer manning and board operating over there. I appreciate you keeping me company this time. Good Lord permitting. I'll see you Monday. Walk with God. Now that's the climate of opinion you want.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Transmitting the treasures of our Catholic faith to your radio every day. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
This is Mike and Alicia Hernan with a Messy Family Minute. For years, we felt like bad Catholics because with our young family, we didn't have enough energy to cooperate in our parish campaigns to do works of mercy in our community. Then the realization came, the works of mercy can be practiced in the home. As a matter of fact, they should be first practiced at home.
What do parents do every day? Clothe the naked, give food to the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, shelter the homeless. Maybe even visit the imprisoned when you send them to their room.
Would you like to keep up to date on all the exciting news, events, and information related to KATH 910 AM and the Guadalupe Radio Network? Like our quarterly share-a-thons, opportunities to volunteer, and special events like the car raffle, Spirit World Live, and the Summer Speaker Series events next year? Join our email list and we can send you occasional updates so you can stay informed. To begin getting emails from us, just email kath@grnonline.com and ask to be added to the list.
Hello, I am Wesley Steffish, a member of Mother Day Parish in Irving and sponsor here at KATH 910 AM. I am owner of Absolute Painting. We serve customers throughout at the DFW Metroplex for both commercial and residential painting projects, both interior and exterior, along with many other projects, large and small. I welcome the opportunity to prepare the estimate for your next project. You can find us at absoluteptg.com or by phone at 972-375-5100.
Since 1991, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has formally directed Catholics to avoid investing in companies that violate Catholic teachings in areas such as abortion and contraception. With an over $26 billion investment platform, Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors offers investments compatible with the teachings of our Catholic faith. Certified financial planner James Bell is an investment advisor representative with Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors. He can be reached at 817-608-5700 7853 to learn more about Catholic investments. Sponsor of Guadalupe Radio Network. Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor and serves all investors. Investing involves risk. More information on the web at kofcaa.com.
Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Back to the Father program here on the Guadalupe Radio Network social media sites of YouTube, X, and Rumble. I think those are the three that we are on today. New studio setup. We've got additional lights, cameras. Everything is really just improving week by week here at the GRN. So very happy to be with you. Thanks for joining me and also Cecil Anderson on this program where we focus on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologia. And, you know, I'd like to begin this week's program with a prayer and just kind of entrust this conversation to Our Lady and with her intercession, and also just thank you also for listening, for tuning in. And we have an important discussion to talk about today. I'll tell you the topic in just a minute, but we'll begin in prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. As I introduce Cecil Anderson, I'm going to lead off with a question. And Cecil, I have not told you I was going to ask you this question.
No, you have not.
Brace for, and I'm kind of positioning myself because
you're
looks
a little
like
bit
I'm kind
off.
of
I was
off
about to tell you, if you come towards me a little bit, I think
this way?
I also need it. The thing is that these new cameras are so great, but they're also mounted, which means that like we have to always be in the right position, which I'm not currently either. So it's okay. I'll figure it out.
Looks like it may be better if I was about 5 inches shorter, but that's okay. You know, it's progress. And so, again, welcome everybody. If you're out there in social media land, this is an interactive program. We love your comments. Last week was awesome because we had several people, especially towards the end of the program, really interacting, really letting us know what was on your mind. And like I said, this is an important topic that we're going to be talking about today. The topic is existentialism, and you may think like, what? What is that? And so if you don't even know what existentialism is, just stay tuned. I'll explain it, and we're going to talk primarily about the three biggest problems with existentialism. And you might think the first problem you have is you don't even know what it is, right? But don't worry, I'll explain that. So let me take a step back and ask you, and I'll ask Cecil as my sample audience. Now, Cecil is a relatively new Catholic, hasn't been a Catholic her whole life, but has your life ever been fundamentally changed by reading a papal encyclical? Okay. Now, I say that, and the reason I ask that is that it leads into the conversation today, because I was just thinking about this before we started the program. There have been 2 papal encyclicals that have entirely changed the entire trajectory of my life. When I read them, it was like, my life will never be the same again, okay? And I think you probably know what one of them is, Cecil, but you may not know what the second one is. But have you, again, I know Catholicism is kind of a new thing. Have you ever read an encyclical and said, you know what, it's never going to be the same after this, and in a good way. I don't mean in a bad way.
I'm trying to think if there's one that's been like life changing for me, because I've read a few. I'm not going to sit here and say that I've read tons and tons. I've read like Humanae Vitae, and I've read bits of some of the ones that have come out in the last few years, mostly in preparation for various things that we've done around here, or for preparing for doing stuff with my young adults. So I'm not sure. Humanae Vitae was beautiful. It was one of those things, though, where I kind of knew the contents of it, though. So it wasn't like it was life-changing in that moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It wasn't
right.
like I read it and being like, my eyes are open to something beautiful. It's not an encyclical, but reading very, very slowly through Theology of the Body by John Paul II. And that one's, I think, is probably going to be the most life-changing, because it's such dense. No, those are just sermons he gave. Not sermons. They're just talks he gave.
Yeah, the Wednesday audience talks.
The Wednesday audience talks he gave. So it's not quite an encyclical, but I think that would be the closest.
It's close as you can come.
Yeah,
it would be an awful long encyclical if it was.
It would be a very long encyclical.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And yeah, Humanae Vitae is the first of the two that, man, back in like the late 90s, a long time ago, over 25 years ago, I was a nominal Catholic and just kind of going through the motions, moved back to Dallas from Mississippi. And I get my hands on Humanae Vitae, and I read it. And it wasn't like, I got to read this through a few more times. I read it once, and man, the scales fell from my eyes. And it was just like life-changing. And I just realized, okay, the church got this right. I want to read everything else the church has ever produced, and I entered into the IRPS program at UD, and I never have looked back. I mean, I've been excited about the faith ever since, and then working in Catholic radio has only accentuated that, and being able to live my faith professionally and personally as well. That's the first one, okay? And then the second one came a number of years later, and this is one that I've talked about, and it kind of sets the stage for the program today. And it was written much later. Humanae Vitae, I think, was 1968. And the second one, and I have a graphic that we can show in my PowerPoint on this, is Aeterni Patris, okay? And this is one that was written in 1879 by Pope Leo XIII, who's one of my favorite popes. Why he's not canonized, I'll never know, but I'll leave that to the wisdom of the church to decide the timing on that. But this actually is found at the beginning of the Summa. If you buy the Summa, you're going to see this encyclical in the front of it. And it's called Aeterni Patris, which is Eternal Father, and that's kind of the basis of the name of the show here, Back to the Father, in that we are being called back to God, we're being pulled back to Him, so to speak. And when I read this, I should say the subtitle is On the Restoration of Christian Philosophy According to the Mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And it was like, wow, I want to study Aquinas. I want to teach Aquinas. This is really compelling. And Leo XIII, one of his, statements is that the problems in the world had come about because of bad philosophy. Philosophers and their errors had infiltrated into education and the media and the everyday life. And so all of a sudden I became not only interested in learning Aquinas and teaching Aquinas, but also who are these philosophers that he's most concerned about, Leo XIII, and what are their errors. And so this is all a very long and circuitous way of introducing the topic today, which is existentialism, and how I think this is a pretty dangerous philosophy, and I think it can be countered very well through the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. And so what I'm going to do is, first of all, kind of define existentialism for you. I'll tell you the four main philosophers who are considered to be the most famous existential philosophers. And then I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why it's really dangerous. And then we'll go over a little bit more particular 2 of the existential philosophers and how I think that their philosophies really kind of led us down a dangerous road, the impact of which we're really experiencing in the world today. Okay? Does that sound like a good plan? And we're all going to do this all within like 45 minutes. Okay? So the next slide kind of gives a bit of information about existentialism and what it's all about. Okay? It is a philosophy which very much stresses personal freedom, individual responsibility, deliberate choice, self-discovery, subjectivism, but mostly through an abandonment of metaphysical concepts of logos, kind of universal truth, nature, telos. And interestingly, as I have in this last line here, it's highlighted by introspection, anxiety, and dread. Okay, so why would anybody want to subscribe to a philosophy whose one of the things that almost always accompanies it is a sense of dread, a sense of anxiety? Okay, and all four of the philosophers that I'm going to tell you about briefly here in a moment, it was all part of their philosophy, is that they were anxious, that they were uneasy about just kind of their view of the world. Okay, so I think we've talked about existentialism a little bit in the past. Sissel, have we dedicated an entire show to it?
I think we have, but it's been a while. We definitely have talked about it. So
did you remember any of the existential philosophers? Like any of them? I'll pop them up on the screen here in a moment.
I don't know if I remember which ones were actual.
Okay.
No, I was gonna. I see. My brain wants to start guessing people, but I don't know. I don't have enough faith in myself.
All right. Well, that's always good to know. Okay, so the next slide shows you the four primary existentialist philosophers, and they
look like existentialists.
Do they look anxious?
Yes.
Yeah, they do look a little bit anxious. But left to right, they are Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, and Jean-Paul Sartre.
Okay, see, I thought that Nietzsche was, but again, I wasn't feeling confident.
Yeah, that's all right. See, sometimes you just got to go for it, okay? And so, so this is very much a philosophy where, the individual person is in the driver's seat. They don't want to rely on external structures. They certainly don't want to rely on religion or anything else influencing them. They want to be self-made. They want to do their own thing. They want to chart their own course, which in and of itself is, sometimes kind of appealing, right? So let me explain the three reasons why existentialism is troublesome. And I have a picture for each one of these. And so this next slide, Cicely, you'll probably get a kick out of this one. If you see this slide that I have up on the screen, what the guy staring at himself in the mirror, do you see that one?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
that's
so
crazy.
Existentialism lends itself towards narcissism. Okay, so it's kind of like navel gazing. It's very much, what am I thinking? What do I want? What do I want to make of myself? That kind of thing. So
this picture is making me crack up. It's just so funny. He's just
the fact that he wants to be that close to himself.
Yeah, he's just like, hello, me.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a good-looking guy, I guess. I mean, but he probably should let other people look at him instead of himself.
Yeah, I was gonna
say, yeah. So that's the first problem. Is it's not, can you be an existentialist without being a narcissist? Maybe, but when your whole philosophy is really about self-empowerment and self-responsibility and charting your own course, you can see how it might lend itself to narcissism. Okay, so that's the first problem. The second one is, as this graphic shows, I think it lends itself to atheism. Okay, now are there Christian existentialists? Absolutely. Soren Kierkegaard would be an example of that. And there are, I think, a lot of people that would consider themselves to be Christian existentialists. So the two are not mutually exclusive. But at the same time, when you're really focused on yourself and you want to kind of push out external influences, you could see how maybe this could turn into some kind of humanism. And perhaps the slippery slope to atheism may not be too far behind. And then, okay, I'm going to put the third picture up there and see if you can see what I'm getting at with this one, Sissel. Just a young lady reading a book, and I tried to find a picture that displayed what I'm going to get at with this third one. But can you kind of? It doesn't.
Someone who is just always got their head in the book.
Well, kinda.
Okay.
No, the danger of existentialism is that it is appealing. And I don't know how to show a picture of something appealing, but what it is the existentialist writers tend to be really good writers. I mean, Kierkegaard was an outstanding writer. Nietzsche was an outstanding writer. Heidegger, not so much. Sartre, yes. Sartre won a Nobel Prize in literature. He didn't accept it, but they offered it to him. He didn't want it. So these guys tend to be very, very compelling because it's kind of like if I wanted to sit around and talk about you and how awesome you are and, how you should, be, self-empowering. After a while, Sissel, you might say, wow, this is kind of interesting,
Sure, for sure.
Yeah, and so it's not, like whereas Arthur Schopenhauer was pessimistic, this is not necessarily pessimistic, but as I mentioned, it does tend to lead and lend itself to a bit of narcissism and also a bit of perhaps atheism, and it is appealing because it has a half-truth. There's some truth to any faulty philosophy or faulty religion. Nothing's entirely false. And if it was entirely false, it wouldn't appeal to anybody. So yeah, I think that's the issue there. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into a couple of the philosophers, and I'll show you kind of how what they taught was appealing in a sense, but also dangerous. And in both of these cases, these philosophers grew up in very Catholic environments. In fact, the first one that I'm going to show you is Martin Heidegger. And both of these are very modern philosophers. I mean, Heidegger died in 1976, and the other one I'm going to tell you about died in 1980. So these are not, way back in ancient times or even Middle Ages. These are, people that were alive, 50, 60 years ago. And so this is very modern. All right, so Martin Heidegger, and if you're out there watching, tell me if you have any familiarity with him. Do you know a little bit about his story? About, anything about him at all? Does any of it ring a bell? Let me know. And so Heidegger, as it says here, 20th century German existentialist philosopher. He was in Jesuit seminary. Okay, so this guy started off in seminary. Now, I don't know if his parents pushed him into seminary or if he chose to do it on his own. But then he not only left Jesuit seminary, but then he, for whatever reason, and only he and God, I guess, know, he became an atheist, okay? Because I think that's one of the dangers. If you get too far into philosophy and you're not grounded in your faith, it can lead you down a bad path, okay? And his top book is called Being and Time. Okay, that's his classic. Okay, Being and Time. It's kind of a provocative and interesting title. I mean, he also wrote a book called Overcoming Metaphysics, and his primary focus is the question, what is being? Okay, because, and I love it. One of my favorite speakers said, asking what is being is kind of like trying to bite your teeth. And I love that expression, okay? It's like to say what is being is being. I mean, it almost kind of defines itself. So, Sissel, to put you on the hot seat, if I were to say what is being, what would you say? How would you define being? And this entirely absorbed Martin Heidegger. This was he spent his whole life trying to figure out what is being. So how would you define that?
Existing.
Okay.
Being all I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about grammar. I'm like, it's a
No, you're absolutely right. Being and existence is like the same thing.
Right.
It's called ontology.
It's existing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. No, I like that. That's a perfect answer. So
perfect.
He one of the things that Heidegger did that was really interesting is that because he was asking very original questions and kind of digging at things in a very unique way, he made up words. Okay. So he like if you ever had a situation where there's something that you're trying to describe, a certain feeling or a thought or an emotion that you have, and there really isn't a word for it. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, and in that case, you might be tempted to make up a word for it. And if it's something that other people say, you know what, I've also felt that way, and there isn't a word to describe it. At least maybe there isn't an English word to describe it. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, it's in the dictionary because you've coined a word. Well, so Heidegger was that way. He had these interesting ideas, but everything was based on being. So he had this word called Dasein. It's actually misspelled on the screen. It's D-A, maybe it isn't. I don't know. D-A-I-S-E-I-N. Okay, Dasein. And by that, he meant the human experience in the world, okay? And again, this is an existentialist, so he's thinking about himself. He's thinking about himself in the world and what it means to be in the world, okay? Dasein literally means being there, okay? So here I am. I'm sitting in a studio. Sissel's across on the other side of the glass. It's 2024, and and Heidegger's like, think about that. What does it mean? What does it mean to be in the world? What does it mean to be alive? Okay, and he got very obsessed about this, and it was interesting. Okay, this will be interesting for reasons that I'll explain in a moment. But he was heavily influenced by his teacher and mentor, a guy by the name of Edmund Husserl. Okay, now one of the other significances of Edmund Husserl is Edmund Husserl was the founder of a type of philosophy called phenomenology. Edmund Husserl and phenomenology had a very, very big impact on Karol Wojtyła, who became Pope John Paul II. Okay, Edmund Husserl was Jewish. And that, you're like, well, who cares? Why are you saying that? Well, it's going to be significant because Edmund Husserl is going to have a high post in Germany as World War II is breaking out, as Hitler is coming to power, and as you know, the Jews fared, horribly in Nazi Germany, to say the least, right? And that's going to impact Edmund Husserl, and it's also significant. And we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so let me just cover this first. We'll go back to Edmund Husserl in just a moment, okay? So Heidegger is saying, well, rather than asking what is a human being, one should ask, what is it like to be a human being? Well, what is it like to exist? What is it like to be alive, And he loved the pre-Socratics, okay? He loved people like Pythagoras and Democritus and Parmenides and these kind of guys. The pre-Socratics were the ones that existed before and taught before Socrates. Okay, hence the name pre-Socratic, right? And Heidegger didn't like Socrates, but he thought the Greek philosophers at least were good because they were focusing on ontology. They were focusing on being, okay, and not so much epistemology and what am I thinking and that kind of stuff. So he liked the Greeks for the most part, but wasn't real big. He didn't like Descartes, okay, because Descartes started focusing on the thought process. I think, therefore I am, and so Heidegger thought that was a bad turn in philosophy, okay, so. And he said, unless we tackle the question of being, nothing else can be studied. All right. So the next slide is a little bit of details about his book, Being in Time, in general. And so I told you Edmund Husserl would come back. Okay. So Martin Heidegger dedicates his book, Being in Time, to Edmund Husserl. Okay. And he's Jewish. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Okay. Because it's going to take a bad twist here in a second. And so Being in Time examines Dasein, which is being there, being in the world, existing. And he had this interesting other term called factuality. And by factuality, he meant that he was kind of analyzing being in the world, but without ever asking to be in the world, okay? He thought it was kind of odd that we just kind of show up. And we show up at a particular time in history, in a particular family, in a particular city, and, the world's been existing for a long time and to exist after us, and we're just kind of like, we kind of pop in, we pop in and we pop out of history. And this is what he referred to as factuality. And he's like, that's kind of interesting. We're just kind of here, and we didn't ask to be here, which I find actually kind of interesting. Okay, so we're thrown into the world without our choosing. And we also know that we're finite. Okay, we know that we didn't exist before, and at least in our mortal bodies, we're not going to exist forever. And he's like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then he also and this is where his philosophy becomes very existentialist, is he had this thing called authenticity. And authenticity means that you're in the world, you kind of got, thrown into the world, and now you got to make something of yourself, okay? You got to figure out who you're going to be. And again, the existentialists don't want to use external forces, and so he's not going to rely on God telling him, that he's a rational creature made to the image and likeness of God. When you throw that out, all of a sudden you got to work things out on your own. You're on your own for this, because you don't have any kind of external structures, no authority to kind of tell you who you are, okay? And hence the anxiety, okay? And hence the wow, this is pretty deep. This is pretty wild, because I'm here for this short amount of time. I got to figure things out. I got to be authentic. I got to define my own existence. Okay, and we got to choose what we are going to make of ourselves. And that was the dilemma that Martin Heidegger had to face, right? Okay, so the next slide talks about something called fallenness, all right? And this is actually one of the areas of Martin Heidegger that I like, okay? And he said, fallenness is the tendency to lose ourselves in mundane activities of life without ever contemplating what it means to be. Okay, so I think of I'll sit there for 15, 20 minutes and scroll through, Facebook. And I mean, people do that all the time these days. He also wrote against technology. I think he almost saw this coming, is that we tend, and wouldn't you agree, especially as a young person, this is something that a lot of young people fall into, Sissel, is just this kind of mindless, banal, kind of rote behavior, which really doesn't do anything. That's not it doesn't really serve any purpose other than just kind of entertaining ourselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's really bad right now, because all you're doing is just it's almost like you're numbing, and not having to think about anything else deeper than that, and just letting your brain kind of be occupied for a little bit and then go on to the next thing, and just, constantly numbing.
And, and this is why I say, I'm not a fan of Martin Heidegger. I think most of what he taught was wrong, and the fact that he was an atheist and grew up in a Catholic family, becomes an atheist, but that doesn't mean there isn't something that we can take from it. Okay, I mean, he was influenced by Edmund Husserl, like I said, the phenomenologist. So was John Paul II in a profound way. But in this regard, okay, this fallenness, I think he's exactly right. Is that we don't spend enough time really contemplating our lives, who we are, why we're here, what's the purpose. This is kind of an existentialist type of mindset, is trying to figure out what's going on. The problem with Heidegger, though, is that he threw out God. Okay, and interestingly, getting back to St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas says that God is existence. Okay, God doesn't just exist, God is existence. And I've heard philosophers say that what really Martin Heidegger was searching for is God. I mean, his whole what is being is God. But when you throw out God and then you spend your entire life searching for being, which is God, but you don't believe in God, you can see where that leads you down an empty road in a dead end. And again, we'll see where exactly this led Heidegger in particular, okay? He also had this whole thing about being toward death, okay? When you navel gaze, when you question being, your existence, what it's all about, I was born, I was died, I'm thrown into this world, and you don't have God, death becomes a very scary, event. And so Heidegger wrote a lot about death. If you were an atheist and you think that, here I am, 57 years old, probably 30 years from now, I probably won't even be alive. That's scary. If without a belief in an everlasting life, without a belief in a loving God, without a belief in providence and teleology, and I'm being directed towards something, and my goal is union with God. When all that gets thrown out, what you're left with is anxiety. You're left with despair. And I think that pretty much sums up Martin Heidegger's life, unfortunately, okay? Next slide talks about his legacy. Okay, he is without a doubt one of the 20th century's most influential philosophers. Many Christians have actually learned a lot from Heidegger because, again, I think it's good if you can incorporate the Christian, theology to it, to ask, why am I here? What's the purpose? What is being? Okay, these are legitimate questions. He was a big influence on French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who we'll talk about in just a second. Now, here's where Heidegger, his own personal life, gets twisted and goes in a bad turn, okay? Because he just happened to live at the time when National Socialism was taking root in Germany. Adolf Hitler was taking power, and Heidegger embraced Nazism, okay? And again, when you don't have authority, when you don't have an outside influence telling you right and wrong, when you're making it all up yourself and you're responsible for creating your own authentic being, hey, there are no rules, right? You can do this. So Heidegger, by his own philosophy, could do this because there's no outside rules telling him what to do. He became a member of the Nazi Party, and he praised Hitler in a speech called The Self-Assertion of the German University. And he ultimately said later on, because again, he lived into the 70s, that National Socialism was a social experiment that went wrong, but he never apologized. He never said, you know what? I was wrong. This caused millions and millions of deaths. And the other interesting thing is that his mentor, his hero, Edmund Husserl, who was his mentor, whom he dedicated being in time to, ended up getting kicked out of his job at the University of Freiburg because he was Jewish. And who took his position? Martin Heidegger, okay, the Nazi, okay, so he got the position, and did he say, oh, wait, that's not right, this is my hero, this is the guy who I dedicated the book to? No, he's like, okay, I'll take that, okay.
Yeah, a little bit narcissistic issues there.
Yeah, I'd say so. So was he narcissistic? Probably, only he and God know. Was he atheist? Yes. Was he compelling? He actually wasn't a great writer. He's a very, in fact, I have Being in Time. I got it as a Christmas gift for myself. And I'm going to read it just because it's such a famous book. But I would not say he's a compelling writer, okay? Modern day philosophers of deconstructionism and Marxism have been influenced by Heidegger. Do you remember, we did a show, Sissel, on... who the famous deconstructionist, and now he's skipping my mind. I can picture him. Oh gosh,
I don't know why the word. I'm not pinning anyone with the word deconstructionist. But doesn't mean I'm not remember. I probably will remember the guy once. It's not the guy who's like the really negative guy, is it?
No, it wasn't. No, that's Schopenhauer. That's
Schopenhauer, right?
Oh gosh, does anybody? I know. So there's people out there watching. Who is somebody? Look up deconstructionism.
Here, I'll look it up myself.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot his name. One name's going to pop up. He's a Frenchman. Is anybody out there? And by the way, if you're watching, let us know where you are. Is this making sense? I've got one more existentialist philosopher. Hold
on, I'm looking at these names. None of these names are hitting me.
Now I know it. I know, but I'll give you the satisfaction. Starts with a D.
Oh, is it Derrida?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't you remember Jacques Derrida? Don't you remember we talked about him, deconstructionism?
That is really not hitting my memory. Like most of the philosophers I can vaguely, I remember this and I remember roughly about this one. He's not. Maybe I wasn't there. Maybe I wasn't there for this particular show. Or was I?
I
don't know.
Maybe you were there, but not here.
That's most of the time, but.
No, I think it was a while back. Gosh, you are certainly forgiven for, not allowing, this all.
That's good because I was going to go to confession for that one.
I just forgave you, okay?
Oh, thank you.
All right, so let's move on. This will be the last guy that we talk about, Jean-Paul Sartre. And Sartre, was a fan of Heidegger, was influenced by Heidegger, and you can see kind of lived at the same time, died in 1980, okay? 20th century French existentialist, atheist philosopher. In many ways, Sartre's even worse. Okay, he was interested in what it means to be a human being and the primacy of individual existence, human freedom, and the objection of objective values, okay? His father died when he was 15 months old. There's a tendency in these errant philosophers to have lost their father when they are young, okay? It happened to Nietzsche. It happened to, I believe it happened to Rousseau. It happened to Sartre. I don't know. It just, and again, there's a book called The Faith of the Fatherless, which highlights the rocky relationship that many philosophers had. I believe Schopenhauer's dad died young as well. So anyways, it's a kind of okay, so he lived in turbulent times, World War I, II, the Vietnam and Korean Wars. I mean, so the 20th century was rough. And his most famous book is called Being and Nothingness. And if that's
oh man, that's just, if I walk past that in the library, I'd be like, you know what? I need to pick me up. This is the book I'm going to read today.
But you know what? You say that, but as I'm going to show here in a moment, when he died in 1980, there were 50,000 people at his funeral, and women were fawning over him, and people.
Okay.
And it was just like crazy.
I don't understand. Sometimes there are some women who I see have, been gone after some very interesting guys, let's put it that way. And I'm like, why?
Yeah,
but why? What is the reason?
Well, I mean, we're all products of our times. And if you live in the time of like World War II and, when nuclear bombs are being dropped and entire cities are being annihilated, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and there's this threat of, like immediate extinction, and there's wars, and, a guy comes along and says, you know what, it doesn't really mean much. It's, again, I think it's wrong, but people are products of their times. And so this guy took off. He was very popular in the World War II era and beyond that as well. Extremely, extremely popular. In fact, he's the only existentialist philosopher that liked calling himself an existentialist. Kierkegaard probably never even heard the name, even though he's the first existentialist philosopher. And Nietzsche and Heidegger said, I'm not an existentialist. I don't like that. But Sartre's like, okay, yeah, I'll take it. He also wrote a pleasant book called Nausea.
I think he needs some help, choosing his book titles.
Yes. And so, so the next slide, Being and Nothingness. Two different realms, being for itself and being in itself. He said emptiness lies at the heart of man's being. There is no human essence, no human nature, pure empty possibility, okay? So let me see if I could... Sartre came up with the formula for how one creates himself or herself kind of like out of nothing. So the being and nothingness means that we start with nothing. Okay, there's nothing that influences us, and we're entirely responsible for creating our own essence. Okay, so the next slide says existence precedes essence. And so this is actually a very, it's something that impacts the world very much today. And let me just kind of explain what this means. If I were to design, let's just say, a pair of scissors, okay, and I want to make a pair of scissors, I would have in my mind the scissors before I create it, right? And I would also have the idea of how it's going to be made. Okay, I want to have two blades, and they're going to be kind of screwed together, and they're going to have a handle, and it's going to have plastic at the end, and the purpose of it will be to cut, and the better it cuts, the better the scissors it'll be. All right, so before that pair of scissors even exists, it already has an essence because it's in my mind. Okay, so as the creator of that pair of scissors, the essence precedes existence. So Sartre, who doesn't believe in God, and he's an atheist, comes up with this formula in Being and Nothingness that says existence precedes essence. And what he means by that is that we are born, we have existence, and then rather than having an essence that was already kind of pre-planned by God, like I planned the scissors, we create our own essence. Okay, so it's up to us to create ourselves in the image of whatever we want to create. Okay, so there is no human nature, there is no essence other than what we create ourselves. Okay, and he says we are condemned to be free because this freedom, and Sartre's big theme was freedom. The freedom was nerve-wracking. The freedom was nauseous. The freedom was really, really concerning to him because everything that he had to make of himself was up to him. And he had this term, and I don't know if it's on this one or not, but okay, so his famous line, we are condemned to be free. We have to define ourselves, okay? So you think in modern day 21st century world, you see this played out profoundly in the world where people are like, okay, I, was born with, male genitalia, but I think I'm a woman, okay, or vice versa, okay. It's happening today. People are creating themselves how they want to be rather than any nature or essence that was put in them by God with a particular telos, with a particular end, with a way, like if the classic example is an acorn, that's going to turn into an oak tree. So when you see the acorn, it's not going to turn into a refrigerator or, a dolphin. It's the very nature of what it is built into it. Okay. And if an acorn is going to thrive, it's going to turn into an oak tree. And so by the same nature, we would believe that when we are born, if we are going to thrive and fulfill our life's goal, it's already kind of built into us. But Sartre rejected that and said, no, there is no human nature. There's nothing already in us. We create it ourselves. Okay,
Man, that's just too much work. I am sorry.
That's exactly,
I'm just like, that is, no.
but see that you totally hit on the very thing. And Sartre would have agreed.
Yeah.
And that's why, he didn't exactly celebrate this. He was just saying this is what it is. Okay. And this is why he wrote a book called No Exit. I mean,
Why do we need to reinvent the wheel, man? Why?
Well, because he doesn't believe in God.
I know.
And so this is where, again, existentialism leads to atheism. Okay. Okay. So the individual person has burden of the weight of responsibility to create themselves. He has a sense of abandonment because in his mind there's no God. And despair as we must act without hope, foregoing the idea that things will work out, okay? He had this idea called bad faith, okay? This is one of his big terms. Bad faith to him, to Jean-Paul Sartre, was a person who rejects his philosophy and instead takes the, quote, air quote, easy route of just relying on, let's say, Christianity or, another religion where, we can look at our faith and say, okay, we're made to the image and likeness of God. We're going to follow the teachings of the Catholic Church. And he'd say, oh, that's so lazy. That's so unauthentic. That's bad faith, okay. To Jean-Paul Sartre. And to which I say, then sign me up for the bad faith.
I was going to say, the faith life is not easy whatsoever, but I don't think his route is easy either. I think he's just looking at it very skin deep. But yes, there is some peace of mind not having to be the one to figure out and create yourself. That's just I'll take that route, please.
Yeah. So, anyway, so wrapping this up now, he wrote a fictional book called Nausea. And Nausea was basically the explanation of the existentialist philosophy in the course of daily life. Okay, it was a novel. It was fiction about this young historian Antoine Roquetin, a solitary historian living in a French seaport town, as he grapples with feelings of alienation, the search for freedom, and the banality and meaninglessness of human existence. Oh, wow. Have a nice day. No exit.
He should have written Hallmark greeting cards.
I know. Wouldn't that have been great? No
Philosopher
exit.
cards.
No
That would be
exit.
hilarious.
A one-act drama that concludes that hell is other people because of the power others have to impose on our well-being. Okay, so, this is a weird guy. This is. And this is a warning against, departing from classic Christian philosophy. Okay, so the penultimate slide here, his legacy, even though Sissel doesn't like him, 50,000 people show up at his funeral. He basically defined existentialism in the 20th century, and he encouraged young people to challenge traditional authoritarian attitudes. And he had a life partner, Simone de Beauvoir, and they were like, we're not going to get married because we don't like the institution of marriage, but she was heavily influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist philosophy, and she went on to write a book that one of the main books that defined feminism in the 20th century. It was called The Second Sex. And she famously said, a woman is not born a woman, but rather becomes a woman. And that doesn't mean, she's born a girl and becomes a woman. What she's saying is that she's born with existence and then she becomes a woman. So by that philosophy...
Oh, in that case, that explains all transgenderism right there.
Exactly.
That easily.
Yeah, she becomes a woman. So some guy could be born a guy and then he becomes a woman. Okay, so that's
so
this
much for
philosophy.
feminism there. You just destroyed woman.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
And,
also, it's so typical for him not to have married her because he's not man enough to do so. Come on, man. You have a life partner because you don't like the stereotypes. No, you just wanted the opportunity to get out of it if you wanted to. So.
Exactly.
Anyhow.
So he wanted to kind of keep all those options open.
What a line. Hell is other people.
I know.
Honestly. I bet that was if he had an email, if he was later
Hell is
in life.
people at gmail.com.
Yeah, or it would have been his signature. Hell is other people.
Underneath the signature where we put Bible verses.
Yes. We put saints and things.
The glory of God is the human person fully alive. No, hell is other people. Well, I don't think he would have been opposed to that. I think he would have been fine with that. And okay, so all right, so what's the point? Okay, and I mentioned he was they wanted to give him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1964, but he didn't accept it. He thought it would be inauthentic to accept an award like that. He influenced a guy named Albert Camus, who influenced he popularized the concept of absurdism. And I heard your really great interview with Daniel. And Daniel referred to the myth of Sisyphus, where the guy had to keep rolling the ball up and then he comes down. And Camus actually wrote a book called The Myth of Sisyphus. I can't say that word. What's it?
I know that you've been trying to say it. I don't think I can either.
It's not synthesis. It's synthesis. Because Camus thought that basically was our life. Okay, it's meaningless, and we're trudging through life, and then we never get to where we want to go, but then we got to do it again, and we wake up every morning, and it's a drudgery, and it's come on, guys, cheer up a little bit, will ya? So I'm going to close out this show on a little bit more positive of a note.
What?
Okay?
After all that?
So I want to... say, okay, do I recommend Heidegger or Sartre? I would say if you enjoy philosophy, if you're really solid in your faith, I'm not going to presume anything, but I don't think I'm ever going to be pulled away from the Catholic faith. Okay, I think I hopefully am somewhat bulletproof because of God's grace, not because of my own effort. But if you want to read some Sartre or Heidegger, do it, but realize kind of where they're coming from. But my last slide here is a book that I heavily recommend.
C.S. Lewis.
And have you heard of The Abolition of Man? Okay.
I want to try to remember if I've read a lot of Lewis. I'm trying to remember if I've read this one. I've definitely read about it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if I have. I think I have.
I'd say The Abolition of Man would be something that would be on the similar kind of page as Leo XIII's Aeterni Patris, the Restoration of Christian Philosophy, because as it says here, he delves into the consequences of rejecting foundational moral value use and the educational system's role in shaping the character of individuals. Lewis argues for the importance of objective truth and the preservation of universal values. Okay, these are what are rejected by existentialism. The main focus of this book is on objective values, which advocate for agreed-on standards of right and wrong based on unchanging principles. Okay, so when you hear unchanging principles, if you've studied the history of philosophy, you should immediately think Plato's realm of forms. You should certainly think Aristotle, and you most principally should think of St. Thomas Aquinas, which was basically the culmination of all that the Greeks provided, mixed in with the Judeo-Christian faith. And but again, this is what's being rejected by existentialism, is that you don't rely on unchanging principles because those come from the outside. Those come from past generations or from a church or from some model that comes outside of yourself, whereas with existentialism, it's up to you. You're figuring it out on your own, and you're not going to take the easy way out, okay? The book also claims for the training of emotions to conform to these objective values. This book is a response to existentialism and moral relativity. Okay, so C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest writers and wisest men of the 20th century, he saw the danger. He saw what was going on. Interestingly, he wrote Abolition of Man in the mid-1940s, around the time of World War II, and that's almost exactly the same time as Jean-Paul Sartre made a very famous speech about his theory of existentialism and existence preceding essence. Okay, so these two guys, did they know each other? I don't know. Staples was Northern Irish, and Jean-Paul Sartre was French. War going on, but anyways, but this, you know, there was a lot of great thinking going on in the 20th century, and Staples was, Lewis was one of the greatest. And I wish he'd become Catholic, but
I know. I love C.S. Lewis. I love all the books I've read by him. I've always enjoyed, because he's also a fantastic writer, first and foremost. But like The Great Divorce, he's got he wrote one after his wife died, and that's a really. I read that one after my mom died, and that was really,
about,
really good.
Like the problem of pain or something like that.
What is the name? I'm saying this, like, what is the name of this book?
I think that's what it is. It's called something like The Problem of Pain. Look, can you look it up? Because
hold on a second. Let me remember the name of it.
I want to say it's the problem of pain, the problem of something like that.
It's something like that. 1 second.
But we will
talk
look
amongst
it up.
yourself.
Okay, so anyways,
it's a grief observed is what it's called.
Oh, really?
A grief observed.
I wasn't even close.
No, yeah.
But,
I was like, I knew it had a really intentional name to it, but I can't remember.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, if you are watching this live, thank you for tuning in and watching the program. And if you are watching this on a recorded basis and you have any comments that you'd like to share with us, all you got to do is email backtothefather@grnonline.com, backtothefather@grnonline.com, and we will be happy to respond to you. Let us know if this made sense, if there's any ideas you have for future programs. We would love that very much. So, Sissel, any other thoughts, comments?
No, I don't think so.
You're not going to become an existentialist, right?
Not today. I think we saved another day.
All right. Thanks, Sissel, and thank you for watching. God bless you, and we'll see you next week. Yeah, we'll be doing it next week, God willing, for Back to the Father. Have a great weekend. God bless you.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.